We have Evan Thomas, whose book, Ike's Bluff, President Eisenhower's Secret Battle to Save the World, begins with the premise that Eisenhower showed a lot of his style and character in the way that he played poker, which I guess was superbly well, actually, and that he used some of those capacities in trying to manage nuclear issues vis-a-vis the Soviet Union. Whereas we also have Dan Klaidman to talk about Kill or Capture, the war on terror and the soul of the Obama presidency, because he finds in the counterterror strategy a lot of revelations about Obama's nature and style. Evan, would you like to say a few things first?
Sure. I mean, although, as Steve has said, these men seem diametrically opposed, at least in style and looks, they both confronted a great humbler for presidents, and that is reality. What you can do and what you can't do. And although it's still the most powerful job in the world, there are enormous limits which every president discovers, sometimes through their grief and sometimes through wisdom, and sometimes through a combination of those two things. So we actually have a lot to talk about, although even they're 50 years apart, Cold War versus War on Terror, and yet lots of connecting dots. Let me stop there and turn it over to Dan.
I actually started thinking about this a little bit when I was reading Ike's Bluff, and I had just recently finished my book, and so I was thinking a lot about Obama and Obama fighting wars and trying to get out of fighting wars. And as I was reading Evan's book, and it came as a great surprise to me, there would be these moments where I would think, wow, that sounds a lot like Obama. There's the sort of the larger frame that these were presidents who had become president after the country had been at war for a very long time, and both of whom wanted to end this kind of this sort of overextension of global war and bring us back home and start to concentrate on the economy and problems back home. And I think they both believe that that one key to a strong national security is to have a strong economy. So they were also trying to cut the budget back and do those kinds of things. But then they both also faced very dangerous worlds. Obama still had to deal with Al-Qaeda, which remained a potent threat around the world, and obviously we were in the height of the Cold War, and there was the very real possibility of nuclear war. And so the question was, how do you deal with those threats while at the same time not do things that could actually spark them, those wars. And at a certain point in the book, I think it was earlier on in the book, I was reading about how Eisenhower studied Clausewitz. And Evan makes the point that what most people know about Clausewitz is the great line that war is just an extension of politics. But if you read deeper into Clausewitz, as Eisenhower did, there was in some ways a more profound point, which is that as Evan puts it, little wars have a way of becoming big wars. And that was kind of a light bulb moment for me, because during the campaign and really in the transition and in the early months of the Obama presidency, Obama was talking a lot to Colin Powell. Powell was kind of his chief military advisor. And I'm not sure if Powell actually talked about Clausewitz, but he did say to Obama over and over again that kinetic activity, as he would put it, has a way of spinning out of control. Very hard to control it. You've got to be very careful. You've inherited a military machine that's still very much on the march, and you're going to have to watch that carefully. And that was a kind of an animating idea for Obama in those, really throughout his presidency. And so that's, for me, where it kind of started. And I'll toss it back to Stephen, and then we
Well,
can get...
you can say that they both recognized this danger, and you can say that Eisenhower warned us against the development of a national security state or a military-industrial complex. But we ended up with one, didn't we? At the end of his term, the national security state was well established. As for Obama, I would say he's probably tried to be careful about the growth of the National Security Agency, but there it is. Its growth and Homeland Security have both swelled immensely during his time. So both of these reluctant, cautious presidents seem to have bequeathed vastly increased national security apparatus, no?
Yes. I mean, Eisenhower is fascinating because although he was a creature of the military, spent his whole life in the military serving as an officer, he was very wary of the military on a couple of levels. One is he fought wars, run wars, and he could see everything that could go wrong. You know, you think of him as a great conquering hero. He spent a lot of his time disciplining AWOL soldiers, and at one point in World War II, he wanted to line up all the American soldiers who were rapists and shoot them with machine guns. That's how exasperated he was. And this is a guy running the most disciplined army in the history of armies. I mean, armies, you know, historically are about rape and pillage. And the American army was very disciplined, but it still had a lot of bad actors, young men frightened, away from home, do stupid things. And so, and just things that can go wrong in battle. I mean, you know, America won World War II, and it did it gloriously, but a lot of things went wrong along the way. And Eisenhower, as a commanding general, had to live with all that day to day, seeing it firsthand. Whatever he told the newspapers, he's the guy who actually has to experience it. So he has a high and necessary and useful skepticism about force and about how it can get out of control.
He has a line where he talks about, well, I know those boys over at the Pentagon.
Well, that's the other piece of it. Aside from the force part, he also could see how in peacetime, militaries will always try to build themselves up by exaggerating the threat. And he used to say, and he didn't say this once or twice, he said it all the time, I know those boys down at the Pentagon, I know how they operate. And as president, little known fact, Eisenhower, at the height of the Cold War, reduced military spending by 20%.
Sure.
We think of, you know, it building up. Well, it is true, as Steve said, the national security state was building up, and a lot of bad things happened on his watch. I don't want to excuse, we'll talk about this. Eisenhower made mistakes, he really did, that he would admit. But it wasn't for lack of effort and struggle to control it, and he cut the hell out of his own service, the Army. Here he is, a guy, creature of the Army, all his pals were from West Point, you know, Army guy, Army green. After he left the presidency, he wanted to be called not President Eisenhower, but General Eisenhower. And yet, as president, he cut the U.S. Army by 1/3 because he didn't think he was going to use it. He didn't want to get into conventional wars. He didn't want to fight a nuclear war. He had to build up our rocket forces, our missile forces, and our air force, so he spent a lot of money on that because that's where the technology was that was driving that train. He spent a lot on intelligence. We'll get to that. But he cut his own service heavily, infuriating his comrades in arms, Ridgway and Taylor, his great airborne commanders of World War II, were so mad they quit. Well, one of them quit and the other denounced him. You know, it takes some guts to do that.
Now, luckily, Obama doesn't face any problem with treatment of women in the military. We know that. Maybe. Well, what about it, Dan? I mean, hasn't the president overseen an absolutely immense increase in spending on national security? And has he done anything like attempting to cut by 20% or?
He's trying to cut the budget, and he hasn't been able to do anything like that. I mean, it is, I think it's true that when Eisenhower was president, the budget represented something like 70% of total spending.
The military
That's
budget.
amazing.
The military.
Yeah. Today it's 20%.
Today it's 20%. So there was less to cut in a way, but he hasn't been able to do that. You know, Obama could not say, I know those boys down at the Pentagon, because he didn't, and because he was never served, he was a community organizer, not a military man. And so that made the relationship more complicated and fraught, and he was